Have you ever wondered what happens after death? Does life simply end, or is there something beyond it? The concept of rebirth has been a cornerstone of Buddhist philosophy for over 2,500 years, but it is often misunderstood. Is rebirth literal, where our consciousness moves from one body to another? Or is it a metaphor for the continuous cycles of change, suffering, and renewal we experience in life? Welcome to the School of Buddha, where today we explore rebirth and the cycle of samsara, one of Buddhism's most profound and thought-provoking teachings. In Buddhism, rebirth isn't about an eternal soul jumping from body to body. Instead, it's about causes and conditions, how our thoughts, actions, and karma create cycles of existence that keep us bound to suffering. Samsara, the endless cycle of birth, death, and rebirth, is not just about future lives. It happens in every moment, in every thought and action. In this episode, we'll explore what rebirth truly means in Buddhism, the 6 realms of samsara, the psychological and spiritual states we cycle through, how karma shapes rebirth, whether rebirth is literal or symbolic, most importantly, how we can break free from samsara and attain liberation. By the end of this episode, you'll see that rebirth isn't just about what happens after we die. It's about how we live right now. Let's dive in. In Buddhism, rebirth is one of the most profound yet often misunderstood teachings. Many people associate rebirth with the idea of an eternal soul passing from one body to another, much like changing clothes. However, Buddhism presents a different perspective, one that is rooted in causes, conditions, and the flow of consciousness, rather than the existence of a fixed self. Before we can understand rebirth, we must first address a fundamental teaching of Buddhism: anatta, or non-self. Unlike other traditions that describe an unchanging soul moving through different lifetimes, Buddhism teaches that there is no fixed permanent self that continues after death. Imagine a river. It is constantly flowing, never the same in any 2 moments. The water moves forward, but it is not the same water at any point. Similarly, our consciousness is not a fixed entity, but a continuous flow of experiences, thoughts, and conditions. The Buddha used a simple analogy to explain rebirth: a flame being passed from one candle to another. When one candle lights another, the second flame is neither identical to nor separate from the first. The energy continues, but it does not remain the same. In the same way, what moves forward into the next life is not a soul, but the momentum of our karma, the consequences of our actions, thoughts, and intentions. If a person cultivates wisdom, kindness, and mindfulness, those qualities shape their future existence. If a person acts out of greed, hatred, and ignorance, they create suffering, which ripens in this life or the next. This is why rebirth is not about identity, but about continuity. Not who we were in a past life, but what mental and karmic patterns continue forward. Buddhism describes consciousness as a constantly flowing stream. Each moment of experience conditions the next, like waves in an ocean. This flow does not stop at death. It carries forward, shaped by the energy of our karma. Think of planting a tree. If you plant a seed of compassion and water it with patience, it grows into kindness. If you plant a seed of anger and nourish it with resentment, it grows into suffering. What rebirth really means is that we are constantly shaping our next experience through our present thoughts and actions, whether in this life or beyond. Now that we understand rebirth as the continuation of consciousness shaped by karma, we must ask, where does this cycle take us? In Buddhist teachings, samsara, the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth, is not just about future lives. It represents the psychological and emotional states we experience every day. Think about your own life. Have you ever felt moments of complete bliss only to be followed by frustration or despair? Have you experienced times of intense craving, jealousy, or fear? These shifting states are all part of the cycle of samsara. Buddhist cosmology describes 6 realms of existence, which symbolize different states of mind. These realms are not necessarily physical places, but states of consciousness that arise based on our karma and mental habits. Following are the 6 realms of samsara, the cycles of our mind. 1. The God realm, or Devaloka, the trap of comfort and complacency. This is a state of temporary pleasure, success, and ease. Those in this realm enjoy happiness but are blind to suffering and impermanence. Because everything seems perfect, there is little motivation to seek wisdom or practice mindfulness. For example, when everything is going well, we have wealth, status, and comfort, but we take it for granted and do not prepare for change. 2. The demigod realm, or Asura Loka, the cycle of jealousy and power struggles. The demigod realm is filled with envy, competition, and the desire to dominate others. Those in this state are powerful but always looking over their shoulder, fearing loss. For example, when we compare ourselves to others, constantly striving to win in life but never feeling satisfied. 3. The human realm, or Manusa Loka, the realm of balance and opportunity. The human realm is considered the best for achieving enlightenment because it offers both pleasure and suffering. It is the only realm where beings can reflect on life, practice mindfulness, and choose their path. For example, this is our everyday existence, the place where wisdom can be cultivated through self-awareness. 4. The animal realm, or Tiryagyoni Loka, the realm of instinct and fear. This realm represents ignorance, routine, and survival-driven behavior. Those in this state live reactively, without deep reflection or wisdom. For example, when we act out of fear, habit, or instinct rather than awareness, it's when we blindly follow routine without questioning why. 5. The hungry ghost realm, or Pretaloka, the cycle of craving and addiction. This is the realm of insatiable desire, attachment, and longing. The beings here are constantly seeking fulfillment but never feel satisfied. For example, when we chase after material wealth, relationships, or success, believing they will bring happiness, only to feel empty once we attain them. 6. The hell realm, or Naraka Loka, the realm of anger and suffering. This is the state of intense suffering, hatred, and despair. Those in this realm experience deep emotional pain and view life through the lens of anger and negativity. For example, when we are consumed by rage, grief, or resentment, unable to see a way out. These realms are not just places we go after death, we cycle through them in this very life. When we feel peaceful and content, we experience the God realm. When we compete with others out of envy, we are in the demigod realm. When we reflect, question, and seek wisdom, we are in the human realm. When we act on instinct without awareness, we are in the animal realm. When we chase desires without satisfaction, we are in the hungry ghost realm. When we are consumed by hatred or suffering, we are in the hell realm. Buddhism teaches that escaping samsara does not mean escaping life. It means awakening to it. The only way out of the cycle is through awareness, wisdom, and compassion. Recognizing these states as impermanent helps us detach from them. Practicing mindfulness and self-awareness allows us to choose our responses rather than reacting habitually. Following the Noble Eightfold Path helps us transcend suffering and move toward enlightenment. By seeing samsara as something we experience moment to moment, we realize that we don't need to wait for another lifetime to break free. Liberation is possible right now, through mindfulness, compassion, and wisdom. Now, let's dive deeper into one of the most debated aspects of Buddhist philosophy. Is rebirth a literal phenomenon, or is it symbolic? The idea of rebirth has long fascinated and perplexed people. Some interpret it as the physical reincarnation of a being into a new body, while others see it as a metaphor for the ongoing process of change and renewal in every moment. But regardless of how one interprets rebirth, its core lesson remains the same. Our present actions shape our future experiences. In many Buddhist traditions, rebirth is understood literally. Consciousness continues after death, conditioned by karma, and takes birth in a new existence. This view is central to Theravada, Mahayana, and Vajrayana Buddhism. According to this perspective, after death, the stream of consciousness carries forward karmic imprints into a new form. The quality of this rebirth depends on past actions. Wholesome karma leads to a fortunate rebirth, while unwholesome karma results in suffering. The ultimate goal is not to be reborn in a better realm, but to break free from the cycle altogether by attaining enlightenment. This belief is rooted in countless Buddhist scriptures, including stories where the Buddha recounts his past lives and those of his disciples. Many Buddhist practitioners claim experiences of recalling past lives, supporting this perspective. However, belief in literal rebirth is not a requirement for practicing Buddhism. The Buddha encouraged inquiry and personal experience over blind belief. This leads us to another way of looking at rebirth, one that is more psychological and symbolic. Rather than focusing on rebirth after death, many Buddhist scholars and meditation teachers emphasize moment-to-moment rebirth. This perspective sees rebirth as an ongoing psychological and emotional process rather than a literal event. Think about your own life. Have you ever completely changed your mindset, leaving behind an old identity or belief system? Have you ever let go of a painful past and stepped into a new way of being? Every time you break an old habit or form a new perspective, isn't that a form of rebirth? Buddhism teaches that we are reborn in every moment based on our actions and choices. Each time we react out of anger, we reinforce that habit, giving birth to suffering. Each time we choose kindness, we create new karma, shaping our future self. This understanding shifts the focus from what happens after death to how we are shaping our experience of life right now. Some Buddhist teachers interpret rebirth as a metaphor for the cycles of change, struggle, and renewal we go through in life. For example, when we let go of an old identity or a past mistake, we experience a symbolic death. When we discover new wisdom or embark on a new path, we experience a spiritual rebirth. Every challenge we overcome, every transformation we go through, is a kind of reincarnation into a wiser version of ourselves. From this view, samsara represents the suffering we experience when we remain stuck in old patterns, while nirvana symbolizes liberation through awakening and self-awareness. Whether rebirth is literal, psychological, or symbolic, the essential teaching remains the same. Our present actions shape our future experience. By cultivating mindfulness, wisdom, and compassion, we can break free from harmful cycles and move toward liberation. Understanding rebirth in this way makes Buddhism practical and relevant to daily life. Instead of worrying about the next life, we focus on transforming this one. Whether one believes in rebirth literally, psychologically, or symbolically, its message is clear. We are constantly creating our future through our thoughts and actions. But if samsara is a cycle of suffering, how do we escape it? This brings us to the ultimate goal of Buddhism: liberation or nirvana. Unlike in some religious traditions where salvation is granted by an external force, Buddhism teaches that liberation is entirely in our hands. It comes from deep understanding, self-awareness, and a shift in how we engage with the world. Buddhism provides the following clear and practical steps to transcend the cycle of suffering. First is cultivating awareness, seeing samsara clearly. The first step to breaking free is recognizing the patterns of suffering in our lives. Meditation helps us see how desires, aversions, and ignorance keep us trapped in samsara. By becoming more aware, we begin to detach from old habits and make conscious choices. For example, instead of reacting with frustration when things don't go our way, we observe our reaction and choose a response rooted in patience. Second is the Noble Eightfold Path, a roadmap to liberation. The Buddha outlined 8 essential practices to cultivate wisdom, ethical conduct, and mental discipline. These include right view, seeing reality as it is, not as we wish it to be. Right action, acting in ways that reduce suffering rather than increase it. Right mindfulness and concentration, training the mind to stay present and clear. Each step on the Eightfold Path moves us closer to freedom from suffering. Third is letting go of attachment. The root cause of samsara is attachment to our desires, our identities, and our fears. Letting go does not mean indifference. It means appreciating life without clinging. When we stop grasping at things, we experience true peace and freedom. For example, instead of being devastated when something ends, we accept change as part of life, reducing our suffering. Fourth is practicing compassion and selflessness. The Bodhisattva path teaches that liberation is not just for ourselves, it includes compassion for all beings. By helping others, we reduce selfish desires and move closer to awakening. When we shift from, "How can I get happiness?" to, "How can I bring happiness to others?" we begin to transcend samsara. For example, when faced with conflict, instead of responding with anger, we choose understanding and kindness. Fifth is realizing anatta, or non-self, the ultimate freedom. The deepest illusion that keeps us bound to samsara is the belief in a separate self. We suffer because we believe we must protect or satisfy the ego. When we realize that life is a flowing process rather than a fixed identity, we stop clinging to false ideas of I and mine. This realization is nirvana, the end of samsara. Breaking free from samsara isn't about escaping to another world. It's about waking up to the truth of this one. As the Buddha said, samsara is not the world. Samsara is your mind's relationship with the world. The cycle of suffering is not an external prison. It is a mindset. The good news, we hold the key to our own freedom. Ask yourself, what patterns of suffering do I keep repeating? How can I begin to break free from them? What attachments am I ready to let go of? By cultivating awareness, ethical living, and compassion, we move closer to true liberation. Not in some distant future, but right here, right now. Thus, samsara is not an external prison, but a mindset. One we reinforce through attachment, craving, and ignorance. But what does breaking free from samsara look like in real life? The Buddha shared a powerful story to illustrate how awakening happens when we recognize the cycle of suffering and step beyond it. One day, the Buddha and his disciples were walking near a river when they saw a man struggling in the strong current. He was being swept away, grasping desperately at rocks and branches, trying to resist the force of the water. "Help me," the man cried, but each time he grabbed onto something, the current pulled him away again. Seeing this, the Buddha turned to his disciples and said, "This is the nature of samsara. It is like a great river, sweeping away those who cling to it, pulling them deeper into suffering." The disciples watched as the man continued to fight against the water. The more he resisted, the more exhausted he became. Then, something changed. The man stopped struggling. Instead of grabbing onto objects in the river, he let go, relaxed, and began to float. He stopped trying to control the current and allowed himself to flow with it. Slowly, the river carried him to the shore. The Buddha smiled and said, "This is how one escapes samsara, not by clinging to desires or fighting reality, but by letting go and moving with wisdom." The story of the man in the river teaches us an essential truth. The more we resist reality, the more suffering we create. The more we cling to attachments, the stronger samsara's grip becomes. The key to liberation is not struggling against life, but flowing with awareness and wisdom. In our daily lives, we are often like the man in the river. We grasp onto relationships, possessions, and identities, hoping they will bring lasting happiness. When things change or fall apart, we fight against the current of life, resisting the truth of impermanence. The more we resist, the more exhausted we become. But the moment we let go of attachment, we begin to float. We stop clinging, stop fearing change, and instead trust in the natural flow of life. This is the heart of nirvana. Not a distant place or heaven, but a state of freedom that comes from seeing reality as it is and no longer being caught in craving, resistance, or illusion. The Buddha's story of the man in the river teaches us that samsara is not an external place. It is the cycle of grasping, resisting, and repeating the same suffering. But if samsara is a mindset, then liberation is also within the mind. How do we move from being caught in the current to floating freely in awareness? We often think of samsara as an endless cycle of life and death, but on a deeper level, it is the cycle of habits that keep us stuck in suffering. Consider this. Have you ever made the same mistake over and over? Choosing unhealthy relationships, chasing material success that doesn't fulfill you, or falling into patterns of anger and resentment? Have you ever told yourself, "This time it will be different," only to end up repeating the same outcome? This repetitive cycle of craving, action, and suffering is samsara in its most immediate form. Each time we chase pleasure, expecting it to bring lasting happiness, but it doesn't. Each time we avoid discomfort, thinking we can escape pain, but suffering still finds us. Each time we attach to an identity, fearing change, but change is inevitable. We reinforce the cycle, just as a wheel turns pulled by momentum. So, what's the only way out? Break the habit. The Buddha taught that samsara exists because we do not see reality clearly. When we start to observe our thoughts and behaviors with mindfulness, we recognize the following. 1. Desires are fleeting. No matter how much we crave something, once we get it, the satisfaction fades. 2. Pain is not permanent. Difficult emotions pass, just like clouds in the sky. 3. There is no fixed self. The person you were 5 years ago is not the person you are today. Once we see this truth, we begin to loosen our grip on attachment. Instead of chasing after external things, we turn inward. Instead of fearing change, we embrace impermanence. Instead of grasping at an identity, we allow ourselves to flow with life. This is nirvana, not an escape from life, but freedom within it. The question is, the fact that you are here reflecting on these teachings means that you are already walking the path of awakening. Ask yourself the following: what patterns of suffering do I repeat? What attachments am I clinging to? How can I begin to let go? Each time you choose mindfulness over reactivity, you weaken the pull of samsara. Each time you practice kindness instead of anger, you create the conditions for liberation. Each time you sit in stillness, observing the nature of your mind, you move one step closer to freedom. This journey does not happen in one leap. It unfolds moment by moment, in each breath, in each choice, in each realization. Thank you for joining us at the School of Buddha. If this episode resonated with you, like and share this video so others can benefit from these teachings. Comment below. What aspect of samsara do you struggle with the most? How do you practice letting go? Don't forget to subscribe to the School of Buddha for more wisdom on mindfulness, meditation, and liberation. In our next episode, we will explore the Bodhisattva path, the journey of selfless compassion, and how we can embody it in daily life. Until then, stay mindful, stay compassionate, and keep walking the path.